Hello there, my name is Gemma and I am a macrame artist. Thank you so much for buying this tutorial. I hope you really enjoy it, and today we are going to make this absolutely beautiful heart macrame coaster. You'll be happy to know that you only need to know 2 knots to make this lovely item, and today I'm going to be using a 3mm single twist cord. This one is called Heather, and it is made by Billy Bag Factory, and it is available on my website if you would like to purchase some of your own. I really hope you enjoy this tutorial. If you have any issues at all or any questions, then please don't hesitate to give me an email or a call, and I can talk you through any bits that you might find tricky. But this one is a very easy tutorial. It's very much tailored for beginners, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. Okay, so let's take a little look now at some of the equipment that you are going to need for this heart macrame coaster. Some of it is necessary, some of it isn't. So the first thing I've got here is useful if you have one available to you. So it's just a wooden dowel. I got this from Home Base. I think it was a bigger one and I've cut it down a little bit. So it's about 1.5 centimeters thick. And that is quite useful to tie our strings onto while we're making our coaster. Other things you can use pins. So I've got a couple of pins here. You can pin your string down to like a nice foam board like I've got here. You can also use a cork board. You can use masking tape. You can use a clothing rail. There's lots of different options to you to put your strings on whilst making your coaster. You're going to need a measuring tape, obviously, to measure out your cord. You are going to need a brush of some description. So I've got a simple little pet brush here that you can get from any pet store, Amazon, things like that. You can also use a comb. I've got this is a beader tool. So this isn't a necessary product, but it is quite useful for when you're trying to tuck macrame cord into tight spaces. You can also use a crochet hook or a needle, or you can just push it through with your fingers. I've got a nice pair of sharp scissors here, and then I've got my cord here ready to go as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure out my cord. So you are going to need 12 pieces of cord that are 120 centimeters long. So let's get cutting. Just a little tip here, once I've cut my string, I tend to wrap it up into a little bundle, just so it's easier to count how many strings you've already cut, and it makes sure it doesn't all get tangled up together. Okay, so I'm now getting my dowel prepared on my board, and what I'm doing is I'm just sticking it down with a couple of pieces of masking tape just so it doesn't roll about while I'm doing my knotting. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you don't have a wooden dowel available to you, you can just pin your strings in place, but what I would suggest doing is pin them so that you've got an 8 centimeter gap before you start your knots, because you're going to need that extra string to brush out for your little fringe around your coaster. So do make sure you do that. What I'll do actually is I will insert a picture here so that you can see what I mean. So each string is going to be folded in half, so if you don't have a dowel, just pop a pin at the halfway point, and then I've put a bit of masking tape at 8 centimeters, or you could use another pin, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to show you the knot that you need to attach it to your dowel. We're going to fold our string in half, so I'm popping the ends together there, and then I'm going to feed the string through till I find the middle, and there it is there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this over the top of my dowel. Then I'm going to tuck the middle part all the way under the dowel, pull it through the bottom there, and then you'll see that the midway point is actually making a little loop. You're actually going to put the 2 ends of your string through this loop and then pull it tight. This then creates a lark's head knot, and that is one of the most common ways that macrame artists will attach their string to a dowel. We are then going to repeat the process with all the other 11 strings. So just to talk you through it again, I've placed the two ends together and then I'm feeding the strings through so I can find the middle point. I'm then going to place that over the top of my dowel. I'm going to tuck the end through and round the back, pulling it underneath, and then using the loop to pop the two ends through and then pulling it tight. Once all your strings are on the dowel, just go through again and just give them all another little pull just to make sure they're on there nice and tight. Okay, so we're going to start knotting now. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going through each string, moving it aside until I find the two strings that are in the middle. So I can move all of those strings now away because I'm not going to need those ones for the time being. And we're going to use the very 4 middle strings. And we're going to do our first knot. So this one is called a square knot, and you're going to use 4 strings at a time. The 2 strings are your outer string, and they're the strings we're going to be knotting with. The 2 strings in the middle are your filler strings, and they won't be moving at all during this process. So we're going to start with string number 1. We're going to cross it over string 2 and 3 and 4, so it looks like a 4 shape. Then we're going to take number 4, bring it out and over the top of number 1 and keep it down on the same side. Then we're going to tuck it behind 2 and 3, and it's going to come out between the gap we've left between 1 and 2. So as you can see there, I'm just pulling it out through the gap, and then I'm going to slide the knot all the way up to the top. So by pulling the 2 strings out to the side, keep the filler strings nice and taut so that they don't get tangled up in the knot. We're pulling that all the way up to where our lark's head knots are. So if you followed the other method of just pinning your strings in place, you're just going up towards where your piece of masking tape is instead of where your lark's head knot is. So now we're going to complete the square knot, and what I've done is I've put number 4 over 2 and 3, and I've brought number 1 out and over the top of number 4. I'm then feeding it behind 2 and 3, and this time we're coming out through the gap between 4 and 3. So again, we're pulling those strings out to the side, keeping the filler strings straight, and we're sliding that all the way up to the top. Make sure you pull it nice and tight. You want to have a good tension so that your coaster won't be too floppy then. It will give it a nice rigid shape. So that's row 1 completed. We are now going to go to row 2, and for this one we're going to add 2 strings in from the right and 2 strings from the left. And this is going to give us 8 strings altogether. So we're going to split them into 2 groups of 4 so we can then complete 2 more square knots. And you might notice here that we're using all 4 strings from our previous square knot, but we're using 2 in the right hand knot and 2 in the left hand knot. This is called an alternate square knot. So each row that we do, we're going to go between each square knot on the next row down. So as before, we're doing a square knot on the left hand side first, splitting our strings into 1, 2, 3 and 4. We're going over with number 1, over 2 and 3. Bringing number 4 out from number 1 and over the top of it and straight back down on that side. And then we're going to go underneath 2 and 3 and then out through the gap that we've left between number 1 and number 2. And then we're going to pull it tight so it goes all the way up to right underneath our very first square knot. Again, keeping your filler strings nice and tight so they don't get all tangled up whilst you're pulling the strings up to tighten the knot. Make sure as well that your knot is nice and straight, so you don't want to accidentally pull tighter with one side so that it ends up being wonky. You want to keep them all nice and straight and uniform. So we're going back the other way now. Number 4 has come over 2 and 3. We're bringing number 1 over number 4. And then it's going behind 2 and 3 and out through the gap left between 3 and 4 and pulling it tight. And you may have figured out by now that we're actually doing our heart upside down. So we're starting with the point first and then building outwards. I just find this way easier rather than having to count how many gaps you've got to leave between the top of the heart. This way I just find it works easier for my brain. So we're doing the right hand side knot now. So exactly the same process again, starting with string number 1, going over 2 and 3. Bringing number 4 out and over the top of number 1. And then it's going to go behind 2 and 3. And out through the gap left between 1 and 2. And then we're going to pull those strings so they go all the way up to the top, and then we're going to go back the other way. We're now moving down to row number 3. So again, I'm bringing 2 strings down from the left and 2 strings down from the right. And we're going to do exactly the same thing again. We're going to split those strings into groups of 4, and starting with the first 4 on the left, we're going to make a row of square knots. And again, as you'll see, they're going in between the square knots we've already made. I won't make you sit and watch the whole process again. Obviously, if you need to wind the video back and watch how to do the square knots again, you can obviously watch that as many times as you want. But for now, I'm going to speed it up a little bit so that you're not sat here watching every single square knot. Another row completed. So from this point onwards, what we're going to be doing is we're going to continue our rows of square knots, adding in 2 strings from the left and 2 strings from the right each time, and we're going to continue doing that until we run out of strings. So again, I will speed it up from this point, just so this video isn't an hour long, because nobody needs to be sitting here for an hour watching me doing my knots. So we've run out of strings now to add into our coaster, but we are going to continue with our rows of alternating square knots. So just to make life easier for myself, I'm taking away the first 2 strings and the last 2 strings, just so I can do a row of square knots and make sure that I'm definitely going in between each square knot above it. We are now going to do 3 more rows of square knots before we start doing the top of the heart. Now that row is complete, I'm going to bring the extra strings on each side back down so that they can then join my other strings for another row of square knots. And taking the 2 strings on the left and the 2 strings on the right away again, so we can do another row of square knots. And bringing them down again for another row of square knots. I imagine you're an expert at square knots now. Okay, you are on your very last 2 rows now, and we have nearly finished our heart. So we're going to take the 2 strings from the left and the right away again, and we're going to do 1 square knot. Then a second square knot. And then the next 4 strings we're going to miss out, so don't do a knot on these ones, just simply pop them over to the side. And then use the next 8 strings to do another 2 square knots. So we're now on our very last 2 square knots. So first thing we're going to do is take the 2 strings away from the left hand side and use those 4 strings that we've now got to do 1 square knot. Now we're going to count 8 strings and we're going to disregard those ones, so we're not doing any knots on these ones, and then the last 4 strings that you come to will be the last square knot. Excellent, your knotting is complete. You have done your heart. Fantastic job. So the next job for us now is to cut the strings off our dowel. So I've just taken the masking tape off so that it's a little easier to loosen the knots at the top. And where the knot goes straight across, that is where we're going to trim. So do be careful not to cut any other strings because this is going to become the fringe of your coaster. So we're going to keep going all the way along until they're all off the dowel. Alternatively, you could always just slide the knots off the end of the dowel. That might be slightly easier, but this is one way of doing it. If you've chosen the method to pin your strings in place, if you haven't got a dowel, then just undo the pins, and where the string loops at the top, just trim it there so that you've got lots of loose strings ready for your fringe. So now the strings are all loose, what we're going to do is we're going to cut off some of the length from the bottom, and make sure you keep hold of those strings because you're going to need them next. You'll notice that there is no fringe on the side of our hearts, so that's what we're going to use our spare bits of string for. So we're going to fold our piece of string in half, and the loop side, the middle side of the string, is going to go through the loop that is on the side of our heart. So this is where the little beader tool is going to come in handy, or you could use a crochet hook, or you could just push it through with your fingers. So as you can see there, I've slid the beader tool through the loop that is on the side of our heart, and I'm going to use that to pull the string through. So just be careful here that you don't pull the whole string through. And then once you've got that through just like that, I'm going to take the beader tool off, and then we're going to do a reverse lark's head knot. So we're going to fold the loop over and then pop the ends of the string through and pull tight. Just like that. Make sure you hold on to the knot so it doesn't pull any knots loose, and that will help add a fringe to the side of our coaster. Okay, so I've gone in a bit closer now so you can see what I mean. So there's a big loop there on the edge, and I'm popping my beader tool through, and then the middle of my string I'm putting through the beader tool, and then I'm going to pull that through the loop so the string goes all the way through. It does take a little bit of a tug. I'd say a crochet hook would be really good for this as well, and actually the loop is probably big enough for you to just push through with your fingers anyway, but I just use the beader tool because it makes life a little bit easier. Then you're going to pull the string out of your beader tool and then fold it over, and then pop your ends of your string through and pull tight. And it's a really effective way of getting the fringe to go all the way around your heart. So I'm just now flipping the coaster over so it's on the other side, so that I can then repeat that again on the other side of the heart by putting through another couple of pieces of string. So now all the strings are in place, I'm just giving it another trim now. I'm not going to trim it as short as I'm going to want it to be in the end, but this is just going to make life a little bit easier for the brushing. So here I've got my pet brush, and we're going to simply hold on to the heart so that we don't pull any knots loose, and we're going to brush, brush, brush. So obviously it depends on your string as how long it's going to take you to brush it so it's nice and fluffy. If you're using a 3-ply string, you will need to undo the strings first. That's why I recommend a single twisted, so it just cuts that step out. And I've flipped the heart over as well, so I'm making sure that both sides are getting brushed as well. I'm actually separating the strings here at the very bottom just so that I know where the point of my heart is going to be. And now it's time to start trimming. So depending on how confident you are with trimming your cords, you can either go straight in with the length that you want it to be straight away, or you can start a bit longer and then work your way down as you get the shape right. But just take your time with this bit. I will trim, then I'll give it a brush, then I'll turn it over, then I'll give it another trim. And I really do take my time with it, because obviously there are bits that are a little bit tricky. So for example, the top of the heart is a little bit tricky, and making sure I get the point nice and straight is a little bit tricky as well. So do take your time with it. Just cut a little bit at a time so that you're not cutting any of the fibres too short. And obviously with your fringe, you can cut it as long as you want it to be. Really doesn't matter. Whatever you prefer the look of is absolutely fine. You may also find it easier to trim with it flat down like I am now, or at some points I will pick up just like this and I'll hold it up more towards me to trim. But do keep brushing it after you've given it a little trim, because some fibres do get stuck folded over. So you give it another trim just to make sure that you've definitely cut every single fibre and they're all exactly the same level. Once you're happy with how it's all trimmed and the shape, you are done. So give it a final little brush and you are done. Congratulations. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you've made a heart coaster that you're really pleased with. Now you can go ahead and make as many coasters as you want in all the different colours. I would love to see your creation, so do tag me in any social media, and thank you for purchasing this tutorial.